program today and tomorrow is that on this coming Tuesday, it's the 160th anniversary of the Pennsylvania's 52nd Regiment going into Fort Sumter and putting up the American flag for the first time in 4 years. So not only did they do that, they also went into Charleston and got the mayor of Macbeth to capitulate because the rebel troops had taken off. They saw their number coming, and they thought they could go up country, except that General Sherman was up in Columbia waiting for them. So we don't know whatever happened to them. I'm sure they came back to Charleston. But this was a dramatic demonstration of a reenactment 20 years ago. A reenactment group from Ohio performed as the 52nd Pennsylvania Regiment. And so, in all likelihood, it was probably more like this, which is an illustration that originated in 1961, and essentially showed the two boat troops, which they know from the history recorded in the official records that they had a boat infantry that had 40 boats, but only 2 went into Fort Sumter that morning of February 18th. The commanding colonel at the time had asked them to come on and accompany him into the city, into Charleston, and had no idea that the rebels had completely evacuated. And so they got Mayor Macbeth to capitulate, and they were the pride of the local black community, not so much of the local community, but the black community was very happy to see the American flag coming back into Charleston. From our records here in the GAR Museum, we have been able to identify 50 people that we have photographs of. This is Major John Hennessy, who was from Pottsville. He was the head of the boat infantry. And this is Philo Burr from Ashoppin, who was second in command. There was a third guy that actually stepped out of the boat first, but he was in Company G, last name Johnson, but he didn't really go on to do anything with the flags. All these other people, including this handsome guy, is my great-great-grandfather, were part of this unit. This guy right here is Ezra Ripple. He was a later mayor of Scranton, who he was probably the only member of the 52nd Regiment to be immortalized with a bust. But he was quite a significant member of this particular museum. That's a picture of him over there, but this is when he was of age to be recruited into the troops. And so he was serving with this unit down off the coast of Charleston at the same time that the troops pictured in the movie Glory were down there, the colored troops. This unit was there after General Quincy Gilmore arrived in South Carolina and took over command of the 52nd. They had previously been in the Peninsular Campaign up in the state of Virginia. But in January of 1863, they decided they were going to do a siege of Charleston. And so he arrived in the summer, and he decided to start the Charleston siege by figuring out how he's going to cut off the supply lines to Charleston so that they could control commerce into the city of Charleston. Charleston, have you been to Charleston before? No. Okay, so down south, I grew up there. I was born up here, but at age 2 months, my dad was transferred to Charleston Air Force Base, where he was squadron commander for the transport group there. And the thing that used to irritate the heck out of him, this is in 1954. So there they still celebrated in 1954 Confederate Memorial Day, but they would not celebrate Federal Memorial Day. we're up here, he remembers going to put flowers on people's graves and all that stuff. And so I don't know if by the time he retired in 1961, if they ever restored it. I know that they now celebrate Federal Memorial Day down there. So I have a nephew that lives in Charleston. There's a future Congressman, Frank Bunnell, and there's a future Governor of Pennsylvania, Henry Hoyt, that were part of this unit. So they had a fairly significant role. Why I have this particular picture is I formerly was the editor of the paper in Tunkhannock, and my Uncle Roy went over and was kind of an advisor to the group about the role that the 52nd had. Then he was around age 80, and I have stuff that he shared with them. One of them was a journal that was kept by one of the soldiers, Daniel Lau from Mashopin, and he talks on February 18th. Last night the Rebs evacuated Charleston. I was at Fort Sumter at 9 o'clock and came to the city at noon. This afternoon I was guarding at the rice mills. February 19th I'm guarding at the rice mills today. And then he talks about going on different patrols. The unit went out to James Island, which was had been a previous source of concern because of the Rebs holding fort there. But all these communities in the journal I'm familiar with because I grew up down there. In fact, I was at the 100th anniversary of the bombing of this Fort Sumter in 1961 in first grade, and then I was back there when I was 57 visiting with my uncle. So I spent a lot of time there, probably the only person out of the Union that been there on both occasions. But I love the Civil War, I'm a fan of it, and I have 4 ancestors that served in the Civil War. So I wanted to use this opportunity to share some of the things about it that are unique. This is the flag that they actually put on Fort Sumter. It is now stored in Harrisburg at the Capitol Preservation Committee. They had 2 versions. They had one for the Grand Reunion in the summer, which was a full version of the flag. But this is the one that got bombed while I was at Morris Island, South Carolina. And President Lincoln was so enamored by the fact that he would use a tattered flag rather than a brand new one that he asked for Secretary of War Stanton to have a volley salute at Military Academy at West Point. And it was 4 days later, which would have been Washington's birthday, every other federal installation in the United States. And so I have a clipping talking about the governor of Oregon. Last evening received a telegram from the Secretary of War dated February 21 advising him that a national salute ordered at every fort, arsenal, and army base in the United States in honor of the restoration of the flag of the Union upon Fort Sumter. The pride of the haughty state that assailed that fortress has at last been lowered. And as the Palmetto State sinks into the endless night, not to oblivion, for its history of crime can never be forgotten, but into a night of infamy. Beautiful and brightly shines forth the constellation of the Union, and the nation's honor grows bright as glory is vindicated to the present age and all those continuing time. It was big enough that they went into Fort Sumter, but it turned out that they were the only local troops taking the risk to go into the city. And so they got there, and Mayor Macbeth capitulated. One of the souvenirs that the soldiers brought back was this flag from the state of South Carolina, because they were so proud of themselves. But if you go into some of the early records, it tells where they stopped and stayed and how they moved around. This is the history of the unit is here. This was written in 1911, and it mentions that they went into Mount Pleasant to a hotel called the Pleasant Mount Pleasant, and I think Company H, which was the unit that my great-great-grandfather belonged to, was one of them that had to deal with the difficulty of staying at the Mount Pleasant. In July 3rd, 1864, Mr. Ripple here was part of a unit that went in to do some reconnaissance over on Fort Johnson, which is not too far from Morris Island. They thought that they could go in and make a quick fix and capture one of the units in that area. Unfortunately, he and 125 other people went in, and they found out that the tide was going out before they were able to get out. And 127th New York, which was supposed to be protecting them and following up on them and watching them in case something happened, they didn't even show up. So this unit in South Carolina captured them all, and they got sent to Anderson, the most notorious prison in the South. We have a picture of it over here. He was one of the lucky ones that got out alive. We have that of the 125, the bulk of them ended up at Andersonville. Some of them ended up at Florence Stampede, which is now a national cemetery in Florence, South Carolina. Unfortunately, we have about 40 people who were captured who have never been accounted for. Our camp secretary, Billy Dixon, has a great-great-grandfather, had two older brothers that ended up in Andersonville, and according to Andersonville records, they were released before the end of the war, but nobody can find out where they were left. So whether they were left to their own devices to get back home, who knows? Ripple was an artist of some note. This is a book that he wrote that was published in this century. But one of the things that he did while he was out there was he entertained both the people that were in his comradeship as well as the people who were their captors, and played the violin for them. But he was also an illustrator of some note, and so some of these pictures, you can take a look at them a little bit later, some of these pictures show what life was like in prisoner of war camp. Soldiers that were in the Carolinas campaign and died, and they're supposedly still in the Carolinas. The unit served the full 4 years of the Civil War. They were part of the Peninsula Campaign up here. They lost 126 troops at Fair Oaks, Virginia, but when they went down to South Carolina, they didn't have quite the same effort of they were trying to move in on capturing the area as part of the siege of Charleston, and so that there was probably 50 or 60 people that died while they were in service there for 18 months. But he, unfortunately, there were 746 people in the unit, but only 340 graves have been identified. So we know from the listing of people that were sent to prisoner of war camp that maybe 30 or 40 of them have not been identified. So we've got some work to do to find that. The largest concentration of 52nd troops that we know of is at Dunmore Cemetery. There's 30 graves there of people who served in the 52nd Regiment, including Mayor Ripple, and we have our Memorial Day program there every Memorial Day since he was part of the unit. So if you're looking for something to do on the end of May, that would be one that you could watch and listen to taps and all of that good stuff. This is a marker from the Beaufort National Cemetery for Mr. Robert Van Duzer. At the time I got this photograph, I thought he might be have a descendant that ran the gas station in Tunkhannock. Unfortunately, he was the Van Duzers in Pittston, and the people from Tunkhannock were from Elmira, New York. But anyway, this is a typical what you will see in a national cemetery. Down at the City Cemetery in Wilkes-Barre, this is a soldier from Company A, William Milham, that actually has a monument there in the shape of a Civil War soldier. The only one that I know of that went to that elaborate shape. And this is more like, this is my great-great-grandparents in the Newton Cemetery, not too far from Schultzville. Any questions? So one of the things I didn't speak to was that Ancestry.com has gone to the trouble to put all of the muster rolls of soldiers that entered the war online. And so this is from Company B, and it shows you everybody. They had two different mustering periods in that because of the service in the Peninsular Campaign and down in the Carolinas. But it gives the age at which they signed up, and then any interesting stuff that you might want to find out about your ancestor. These are out there for everybody that has traceable ancestor. There's a lot of information that is being made accessible to the public. I think they're going to launch a new campaign next month at Ancestry. But if you haven't, have you ever seen the movie Glory? The 52nd Regiment was there at the time. They were there. So after the program is over next Sunday, we're going to talk about how they actually won. Even though they lost that battle, they won the war. And that was the beginning of the end for the South Carolina troops. And they eventually got home within a matter of months.